President Biden taking action Thursday under pressure to do something about record high gas prices up more than 75% since his inauguration 14 months ago. For reaction to the president's latest efforts and much more, let's bring in Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. Welcome back, Senator. Good to see you.
Glad to be with you.
Okay, much to discuss, but let's start there. You see the prices. There's a lot of concern about what can and can't be done. Here's what the president said today about who needs to act on this.
Right now, oil and gas industry is sitting on nearly 9,000 unused but approved permits for production on federal lands, or more than 1 million unused acres they have a right to pump on. Families can't afford that companies sit on their hands.
We cannot allow the fossil fuel industry to use this as an excuse to reverse everything we're doing to save the planet.
So the president says, get to work if you've got these leases or you could lose them. But the speaker says this is not about ramping up American production.
Yeah, look, what Pelosi and Biden said is utter nonsense. What they did as soon as the president came into office was no new leases on public lands, a whole array of regulators making it difficult to function even in the places where they're allowed to. We were energy independent in 2019 and exporting oil and gas. Every solution they come up with involves somebody else sending energy to Europe rather than us. And with regard to dropping some of the reserves and the strategic petroleum reserves, about like dropping a pebble in the ocean, it's going to have almost no impact on daily consumption. So look, don't blame the gas prices on Putin. They started at the beginning of this administration. It is a reaction to the shutdown of the fossil fuel industry. They go after them in every single conceivable way. What we ought to be doing is pumping more of our own to take care of not only our needs, but to help the Europeans as well.
In the midst of this, we are talking about the president's budget and our financial house here at home. Here's what the current Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer had to say about that fight.
Republicans can't stand the thought of asking the ultra-rich to pay their fair share. Republicans seem to think it's radical for the federal government to dedicate resources to a clean energy future.
So a couple of things there, but of course what we've heard in the headline after headline has been from the Democrats that you guys just want to protect ultra-rich people. Yeah,
well, they want to get $2.5 trillion in new taxes. If they had their way, you'd be getting a massive amount of new revenue. That's not what we need. He laid out a budget that increased non-defense by 14% and didn't even increase defense by enough to cover the increase in inflation. But we got a war going on in Ukraine. Our goal ought to be to help the Ukrainians win, to defeat the Russians right there. And so we have a defense budget that's simply not realistic. America doesn't need any new taxes. We did tax reform back in 2017. It produced a gusher of revenue by actually lowering the rates, for example, on corporations, produced a gusher of new revenue. Raising taxes is not a good idea at this particular juncture.
You mentioned Ukraine there. I think it was the Wall Street Journal that's got a piece out from the editorial board tonight saying we're not doing enough to help Ukraine. It seems like there's been a bipartisan swell of support to try to get something done. What more do you think we could be doing?
Yeah, I think the problem is the president has generally finally gotten around to doing the right thing, but we don't have a lot of time. He's sort of been pulling his punches all along. I don't think we hear the president saying what I think our goal ought to be is to win, not to have some negotiated settlement unless President Zelensky is willing to do that. This is extremely important. This is an opportunity for the democratic world to punch this bully right in the nose, and others are willing to carry the fight. I was with a Ukrainian American today just talking about her relatives back there and how sad the whole situation is. So the answer is, as my colleague Ben Sass said, give them anything they need that'll shoot and help them win the war.
Are you worried about this broadening, an incursion into a NATO country that then triggers Article 5 about U.S. troops being pulled into this? I mean, where does this end?
Yeah, well, U.S. troops are not going to cross the NATO line, but it's important for us to plus up American troops and European troops in those Eastern Bloc countries. The administration has done that. That was the right thing to do. The wrong thing to do was things like preventing these Russian-era MiGs from being transferred from Poland into Ukraine. The Ukrainians have the pilots. They know how to use them. In other words, we ought to be giving them everything we possibly can to help them win this war.
Let's talk domestic again. One of the legacies you've got and President Trump, something you all did together, was to get more people onto the federal bench, your nominees, get them confirmed in an historic fashion at a pace and the numbers that will always be credited to you and President Trump for getting that done. Now we're looking at an opening on the Supreme Court. Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson has been through her confirmation hearing, and the editorial board at the Washington Post thought Republicans did not behave well under the circumstances, saying this: Republicans such as Senator Lindsey Graham have congratulated themselves for declining to treat Judge Jackson the way Democrats handled the nomination of Brett M. Kavanaugh. In fact, by the most relevant measures, Mr. Graham and a handful of other Judiciary Committee Republicans have handled themselves worse.
I couldn't disagree more. I don't think she was treated poorly. She was asked about her record. And her record, I think, was hard to defend. I mean, for example, she has a particularly curious view about certain kinds of criminal behavior. In this particular case, people who distribute child pornography, of all things. In every one of the cases where she was sentencing in a child pornography case, she gave out sentences that were below the guidelines that are part of the statute. I think she's a judicial activist. She's very smart. She's very capable. She's going to be exactly what President Biden wants, a very liberal Supreme Court justice.
You've got at least one Republican on record now saying she will vote for her. Do you expect others?
I don't know. We'll find out there next week.
Well, I want to play something from Senator Dick Durbin talking about trying to get Republicans to come along with this nomination. Here's what he said.
There are those within the Republican Party, I know from speaking to them, who understand the historic significance of this nomination and want to make sure that Mr. Lincoln's party, the grand old party, is on board, being at least some of them supporting her nomination. I think that can happen. We're going to continue to work toward that end.
What do you make of that sort of?
Well, the Democrats want to make this confirmation about race or gender. We don't look at judges that way. Most all Republicans believe in what's called a strict construction. That is, judges who make their very best effort, as Justice Scalia put it, to follow the law. And Scalia used to say, if you weren't happy with the outcome you get, that sometimes happens when you follow the law. And I think all indications are that Judge Jackson is going to be a liberal activist from the bench. But the good news for people like me is the court's still 6-3. We made massive changes over the last 4 years that I think put the court in very, very solid position with a great number of judges who believe in the quaint notion that maybe a judge ought to follow the law.
Well, Senator, we always appreciate your time. We are going to watch that vote and all the other things keeping you busy on the Hill. Great to see you.
Thank you, Shannon.